I am 70 years old, and I've always believed dignity was something you ironed into your days crease by crease, never rushed. My name is Lyris Haddon. I live in a small house that leans toward the Ashley River, the same one I've watched change color for 40 years. Most mornings begin the same way: a cup of Earl Grey, a folded newspaper, the soft hum of the ceiling fan. But that morning, peace lasted only until the tablet on my table blinked alive. It was a Facebook post, one of those that doesn't just surprise you, it rearranges your heartbeat. My daughter, Maris, stood under a canopy of magnolia trees, wearing a white dress I'd never seen. She was kissing a tall man named Evan, and someone had written in elegant script below the photo, "Best day of my life." For a long moment, I stared, thinking maybe it was a styled shoot for her friend's business. But then more photos appeared: her friends, the officiant, the bridesmaids, all gathered in that glowing Charleston garden. Every image confirmed what I couldn't yet admit aloud. My daughter had gotten married, and I hadn't even known she was engaged. I called her before I could think better of it. The phone rang long enough for hope to die a small death inside me. When she finally answered, her tone was sharp, impatient. "Mom, I can't talk right now." I swallowed the tremor in my voice. "Maris, what's happening?" "You're married." There was a pause, just long enough to let cruelty breathe. "Yes." We kept it small, then, almost lazily, she added, "My mother-in-law doesn't like you. She thinks you're pathetic." The word dropped like something heavy into the quiet room. I could hear people laughing somewhere behind her music. Glasses clinking, a new world spinning without me. My throat felt dry, but I managed to whisper, "Pathetic, I have to go," she said, and the line went dead. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear, the tea untouched. Steam no longer rose from the cup. It had gone cold. Like everything else in the room, outside, the river kept flowing, steady and indifferent. I lifted the cup at last, but the bitterness that reached my tongue was my own. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing her in that white dress, smiling into a life that no longer included me. By morning, I realized this wasn't just her wedding day. It was my uninvited ending. After the call ended, I sat at the table until the sky dimmed and the house turned gray. The silence felt heavier than the years that had built it. I reached for the small wooden box beside the sewing machine, a habit, not a choice. Inside were spools of thread, buttons, a thimble worn smooth from years of use. My hands knew their weight, the way some people know prayer beads. I became a widow at 55. One moment, Harold was teasing me about oversalting the gumbo. The next, he was gone. Heart stopped at a traffic light on Meeting Street. Maris was 20 then, studying art history at the College of Charleston. I remember standing outside her dorm that night, holding my grief together with both hands so she wouldn't see it break. After that, I sewed through everything. Days, nights, holidays, wedding gowns mostly. I stitched for brides I'd never meet again, each one radiant, each one walking towards something I no longer had. I charged little, but my reputation spread, and the money I made, every hem, every bead, went straight into Maris's future. When she graduated, I gave her the deed to a cottage on Folly Beach. It cost $200,000, nearly every cent Harold and I had saved. I told her, "This is your anchor, baby. A mother's insurance policy." She cried then, or maybe pretended to. I didn't look closely enough to tell. For years afterward, I drove out there on Sundays, bringing her groceries, trimming the hydrangeas, fixing curtains. Evan was just a name she mentioned occasionally, someone from work, someone steady. I never met his parents, though she once said his mother preferred quiet women. I should have heard what that meant. Now, that cottage belongs to another version of my daughter, a woman with a husband, a new family, and a world scrubbed clean of me. I picture them inside, drinking wine, laughing, maybe placing photos on the mantel where mine used to sit. I pick up a piece of lace from the sewing table, trace the pattern, and let the needle pierce the fabric. The thread slips through like memory fine, fragile and impossible to pull back once it's gone. The next morning, I drove to Folly Beach with the air thick enough to taste. Magnolia petals clung to the windshield, pale against the glass, trembling with each mile. I told myself I was going to understand, to speak face to face, to look my daughter in the eye and remind her of who I was. The cottage sat at the end of a sandy lane, the one I'd painted soft blue when she first moved in. The curtains I'd sewn still hung in the front windows. I rang the bell once, twice. Evan opened the door. His shirt was half-buttoned, hair still wet from a shower. He smiled in that way people do when they think they've already won. "Oh, it's you," he said. "I need to talk to Maris," I told him. "She's busy," he said, leaning against the frame like it belonged to him. "I'll wait." He didn't move. "She doesn't want to see you, Mrs. Haddon. Maybe you should head home." Before I could answer, Maris appeared behind him, barefoot, wearing a robe I'd given her one Christmas. "Mom," she said flatly, "why are you here?" I felt my voice catch. "I just needed to understand. You got married. You didn't even tell me." She sighed. "I told you. Evan's parents wanted something small. And honestly, Mom, it's better this way. Better I took a step forward." But Evan shifted, blocking me. He laughed softly. "You're just jealous she finally has a real family now." Maris flinched, but she didn't correct him. I looked at her, then the daughter I'd raised on casseroles and late-night study snacks. The girl who once called me her best friend. She kept her eyes on the floor, arms folded tight. "Maris," I whispered, "can we please talk alone?" Her answer was barely a breath. "Whatever you have to say it in front of my husband." For a moment, I couldn't feel my hands. Then I nodded, stepped back, and turned toward the car. Evan shut the door before I reached the gate. The sound was clean, final. By the time I started the engine, the magnolia petals were slipping from the windshield, falling one by one into the sand. That night, the house felt smaller than ever. I didn't turn on any lights. I wanted the dark. It matched the way her voice had sounded on the porch, thin, embarrassed, almost bored, pathetic. The word kept coming back like a dripping faucet. I sat at my sewing table and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside lay an old ledger bound in brown leather. It smelled faintly of starch and thread. I'd used it for years to keep track of what I earned and what I spent. Every dress I'd ever stitched for a bride was written there. Dates, deposits, little notes about fabric orders. After Harold died, I started using the same book to track Maris's bills. There it all was. Neat and faithful tuition payments, car insurance, phone plan, the joint savings account I'd set up for her future emergencies. Each number represented another piece of care, another invisible hour I'd given away without ever asking her to notice. The silence in the room grew heavy, pressing against my chest until I spoke out loud just to break it. Steady as oak. Harold had called me once, back when the storm took out half our fence and he found me hammering boards in the rain. "You bend, Lyris, but you never break." I laid my palm over the ledger, the way one might bless a grave. "You were wrong this time." "Harold," I whispered. Something did break. The word pathetic had become a kind of mirror. When I looked into it, I saw not weakness but proof that I had mistaken giving for love, dependence for devotion. I took a pen and flipped to a blank page. The ink bled slowly into the paper as I wrote a single word at the top. Endings. Underneath it, I began to list phone, insurance, savings, honeymoon, house. My handwriting stayed steady, clean. By the time I finished, the moonlight had reached the edge of the desk. I closed the ledger gently, as if sealing a promise, and sat back in the dark, no longer afraid of the sound of my own resolve. By dawn, the sky outside had turned the same gray as the ledger cover. I hadn't slept. But I didn't feel tired, just emptied out. Like something inside me had finally stopped struggling. The kettle hissed on the stove, but I let it whistle until the sound went thin. On the kitchen table lay the page I'd written the night before, the one titled Endings. The ink had dried stiff. I took a clean sheet of paper and copied each item carefully, line by line, like a dress pattern I meant to follow exactly. Phone plan, car insurance, streaming accounts, utilities, joint savings, honeymoon booking, 6 lines, 6 threads I had tied and now meant to cut. I ran my finger down the list, steadying myself. Each word carried a memory. The phone plan, our nightly calls when she first moved to the beach. The car insurance, the day she'd backed into a pole and cried until I told her it was fine. That metal could be mended. The honeymoon, something I'd paid for in secret, thinking it would make her feel cherished. I caught my reflection in the window, hair unpinned, eyes clearer than they'd been in years. I raised you to stand tall, I said softly, not to lean forever. Leaned. I began with the phone company, waiting through the hold music until a young man's voice greeted me. I'd like to remove a secondary line. I told him. He asked, "Are you sure?" "Ma'am, this will disconnect service immediately." "Yes." I said, "That's the idea." After that came the insurance, the streaming accounts, the utilities, all the invisible comforts that had followed Maris into adulthood. My voice grew steadier with each call. By the time I reached the bank, I was almost calm. The clerk confirmed the joint account balance, then asked if I wanted to transfer the funds. "I do," I said. "All of it." When the final confirmation email arrived, I folded the list in half and slid it under the ledger. The kitchen was silent, except for the slow ticking of the clock. For the first time in years. The sound didn't make me anxious. It sounded like breathing. The sun was barely up when I made the first call. The resort in Key West answered with a cheerful voice, all brightness and welcome. I gave my name, my reservation number, the dates. There was a pause as the woman searched her screen. "Oh yes, Mrs. Haddon," she said. "This was a honeymoon package for your daughter, correct? Would you like to reschedule?" "No." I told her, "Cancel it." I should mention, "Ma'am, the refund will be partial, roughly 60% of the total." "That's fine," I said. "Send whatever comes back to the card on file." Her tone softened. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It looked like such a lovely trip." "It did," I said, and hung up. The next call was to the bank. I gave them my account details, the joint one I'd opened for Maris when she was in college. The clerk confirmed the balance, $20,000. "Would you like to leave it open?" she asked. "No, transfer everything to my personal account and close it." A beat of silence. Then a quiet, "Yes, ma'am." By the time the funds appeared on my screen, I could almost feel my heartbeat slowing. Around noon, I called Patricia Holt, the realtor who had sold me the Folly Beach cottage years ago. Her voice came warm and cautious. "Lyris, it's been a while. What can I do for you?" "I need to sell the beach property, immediately." There was a pause. "That's your daughter's house, isn't it?" "It's still in my name." Patricia exhaled slowly. "If you do this, you should be ready for fallout." I let her words settle, then said, "I've already had the fallout." By the end of the day, the paperwork arrived in my inbox. I read each line twice, then signed my name with a steady hand. The digital pen glided across the screen like a needle through fabric clean. Final. Quiet. When I closed the laptop, the house was still. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask for company. I let it stay. The phone began ringing before I finished my coffee. It was too early for anyone but her. I watched her name light up the screen and let it ring. Once, twice, 5 times. The sound filled the house like a question I refused to answer. When it stopped, I stared at the silence that followed, then slid the phone aside. A minute later, it started again. I turned the volume down, almost gently, and spoke into the quiet. You made your choice. Maris. My voice sounded even, steadier than I expected. By afternoon, there were 10 missed calls, 2 voicemails, and a message blinking at the top. Mom, please call me. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew the words would tangle apology and anger until they meant nothing. Instead, I typed a single sentence. You said I'm pathetic. I've accepted that. You're on your own now. I read it twice before pressing send. The delivery checkmark appeared almost instantly. I waited for another call, but none came. I went to the living room, took down the framed photo from the mantel, the one of Maris on her college graduation day, arms around me, her face bright with pride. I studied it for a long time, then placed it gently into the drawer where the old ledger rested. One by one, I deleted the photos from my phone. Each swipe felt like trimming a loose thread before it caught on something and tore. When I was done, I turned the phone face down on the table. Outside, the light was fading. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The air had changed cooler, the kind of chill that made the magnolia leaves rustle like whispered secrets. For the first time in months, I breathed without feeling the weight of her name in my chest. Somewhere beyond the trees, church bells began to ring. Low and distant, I listened until they stopped, until the silence between each sound felt like peace. Weeks passed without sound from Maris. The phone stayed face down on the kitchen counter, its black screen gathering dust. The quiet that used to sting now felt almost companionable, like an old dog resting at my feet. One morning, a letter arrived from the Charleston Textile Museum, a call for volunteers to teach beginners sewing classes. I filled out the form before I could change my mind. On my first day, 10 girls sat around long tables, their hands clumsy with needles and fabric. The youngest, no more than 12, looked up at me and asked, "How do you make the stitches straight, Patience?" I said, "The thread listens to steady hands." The words surprised me. They sounded like something I needed to hear myself. By the end of the month, I was teaching twice a week. The rhythm steadied me, the sound of thread pulling through cloth, the laughter of girls who hadn't yet learned to guard their joy. One evening, my neighbor Celeste stopped by with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She was widowed too, a soft-spoken woman with a sharp sense of humor. "You look different." "Lyris," she said, settling beside me on the porch, like someone remembered how to breathe. "Maybe I just stopped holding my breath," I told her. Celeste smiled. "That's close enough to living." Later that week, I booked a 2-day trip to Savannah. I told myself it was only to see something new somewhere that wasn't a memory. The train ride was quiet. I watched the marshes blur past, green fading into gold. In Savannah, I walked along the riverfront, the wind tugging gently at my scarf. The water shimmered, neither accusing nor forgiving, just constant. I thought of Maris then not with pain, but with distance, the way you think of someone from another lifetime. When I returned home, the house greeted me without echo. I made tea, folded the new brochure from the museum, and placed it next to my ledger. The clock ticked in its usual patient rhythm, and for once, I didn't rush to fill the silence. It was enough to sit and let it be. The rain had been steady all evening. a soft tapping against the windows that sounded almost like breathing. I was mending a tear in a child's apron from the museum when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was Celeste, maybe bringing soup or conversation. But when I opened the door, I froze. Maris stood there, soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. She looked smaller, like someone who had been emptied out and forgotten to fill back up. Her eyes were red, the kind of red that doesn't come from weather. "Mom," she said, voice trembling. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She crossed the threshold without looking at me, dripping onto the floor. I fetched a towel and one of Harold's old sweaters. She wrapped herself in it, arms tight around her body as though she could hold herself together by force. "Evan's gone," she said finally. "He left 3 weeks ago." I said nothing. He took what was left of the money and moved in with someone else, someone with a richer family. I thought. She swallowed hard. I thought we were happy. The words fell between us, fragile and wet. "He called me useless," she went on. "Said I'd let you ruin him, that you'd made him look like a fool when you sold the house." I kept my eyes on the teacup I'd placed in front of her. Steam curled between us like a ghost of something old. She whispered, "You were right about him, about everything, and I'm so sorry, Mom." I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap. There was so much I could have said, how many times I'd wanted to warn her, to shake sense into her, to tell her that love without respect rots from the inside out. But the words never came. Instead, I pushed the cup closer. "Drink before it gets cold." She nodded, tears spilling down her face. The only sound left was rain against the windows, steady and relentless, as if it meant to wash us both clean. By morning, the rain had slowed to a mist that clung to the windows. Maris sat at the same kitchen table where I'd first read about her wedding, her damp hair now brushed and tied back. The house smelled faintly of tea and starch, old comforts holding their ground. I filled both cups, careful not to spill. She wrapped her hands around hers as if it might steady her. "I don't know where to start," she said softly. "Start where it hurts." I replied. Her voice shook. "I ruined everything. I believed him when he said you were controlling, that you looked down on us. I wanted to prove him wrong. Instead, I lost you. I stirred my tea once, then set the spoon aside. You didn't lose me. Maris, you walked away." She looked up, eyes swollen but clear. "Can we fix it?" I let the question settle between us like steam rising from the cup. "I love you," I said. "But love needs respect to survive. And respect takes time. It takes proof." Her face crumpled, but she nodded. "Tell me what to do." "You get help," I said. "Real help. I know a counselor downtown who works with families. I'll give you her name." Her shoulders sagged. "You're not going to help me with money." I met her eyes. "No, money doesn't heal what's broken. You'll have to stand on your own now." She pressed the edge of the sweater sleeve to her face, wiping her tears. "I understand." I reached across the table and took her hand just once. Brief and steady. "Then we start from there." She leaned forward, trembling, and hugged me. The gesture was small, almost uncertain, but it held more honesty than any apology could. When she finally stood to leave, her eyes lingered on the door as though afraid to open it. At the threshold, I said quietly, "I stitched your life with love, Maris. Now it's time you learn to sew your own seams." She nodded, whispered goodbye, and stepped into the gray morning. I stayed by the window, watching the drizzle fade. The city lights across the river flickered soft and golden. Steady as breath, the air smelled clean again. And for the first time in a long while, I let it in.